heavy oak gavel hovered in the air, a suspended guillotine ready to sever a 20-year bond and execute the remnants of a failed life. Inside the suffocating, stale air of the Los Angeles Superior Court, Julian Thorne, the tech billionaire whose face frequently graced the cover of Forbes, allowed himself a small, private smirk. He had won. He had the best, most expensive lawyer's money could buy, a prenuptial agreement drafted with surgical precision that left his estranged wife with little more than a pittance, and a judge notorious for his impatience with any hint of emotional theatrics. His wife, Elena, sat across the aisle from him, head bowed, her hands trembling violently in her lap. Julian checked the platinum watch on his wrist. His 24-year-old mistress, Sophia, was waiting at the airport, poised for their celebration trip to the Maldives. Judge Harrison Sterling cleared his throat, the fine tip of his fountain pen hovering above the signature line that would finalize the dissolution decree. If there are no further evidences to present, the judge began, his voice a gravelly monotone. Julian started to stand, smoothing his bespoke jacket, eager for the formality to conclude. But then, Elena's trembling hand didn't reach for a tissue or a glass of water. It reached slowly into her worn, battered leather tote bag, a utilitarian artifact that looked entirely out of place in the opulent courtroom, and pulled out a single, yellowing manila envelope. The sound of that coarse paper sliding deliberately across the polished mahogany of the defense table was, in the sudden, charged silence of the room, louder than a gunshot. Julian froze, halfway through buttoning his cuff. He didn't know it yet, but his carefully constructed world was already over. The air conditioning unit in courtroom 304 hummed with a low, mechanical drone, doing little to cool the oppressive, stifling tension that hung over the proceedings like a shroud. Outside, the unrelenting Los Angeles sun beat down, baking the pavement, but inside, the atmosphere felt unnaturally frigid. Julian Thorne sat ramrod straight at the defendant's table, looking every inch the master of the universe he wholeheartedly believed himself to be. At 45, he had maintained the rugged good looks and aggressive posture that made him a constant fixture in the business media. His charcoal gray suit was tailored specifically for him, sourced from the finest Seville row house, costing more than the annual salary of the bailiff standing silently by the door. He drummed his fingers on the slick, dark wood of the table, a rapid, rhythmic tap-tap-tap that was the only visible betrayal of his impatience. To his right sat Arthur Blackwood, a divorce attorney so famously ruthless he was known throughout legal circles simply as the Butcher. Blackwood was currently flipping through a stack of documents with an expression of profound boredom, supremely confident that this was an utterly open and shut case. Across the aisle sat Elena Thorne. In stark contrast to Julian's expansive physical presence, Elena looked deliberately small and minimized. She wore a simple, unadorned navy dress that had visibly seen better days, and her dark hair was pulled back tightly in a severe, practical bun. She wore no jewelry whatsoever, not even the platinum wedding band she had worn faithfully for 2 decades. That ring currently sat in a velvet box on the judge's bench, designated as Evidence A in the dispute over marital assets. She stared intently at her hands, her knuckles white, as she gripped a pen she hadn't once used. "Mr. Blackwood." Judge Harrison P. Sterling boomed from the bench, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. The judge was a man of significant girth and an even more significant, frequently tested intolerance for wasted court time. He adjusted his heavy spectacles, glaring down at the parties involved. "We have been at this for 3 days. My patience is wearing thin. The petitioner, Mrs. Thorne, has failed to produce any substantial, verifiable reason why the prenuptial agreement signed in 2003 should be invalidated. Do you have closing remarks?" Blackwood stood up instantly, smoothing the silk knot of his power tie. "Your Honor, the facts are simple and irrefutable. Mr. Thorne built Thor Enterprises through his own singular genius and relentless hard work. Mrs. Thorne, while providing moral support, has otherwise enjoyed a life of extraordinary luxury provided entirely by my client. The prenuptial agreement she signed 20 years ago explicitly states that in the event of a divorce, she is entitled to a fixed settlement of $500,000, and nothing more. No equity, no alimony, no claim whatsoever to the estate. Blackwood paused for maximum dramatic effect, turning his gaze to look at Elena with a sneer thinly disguised as professional pity. My client is generous, Your Honor. He is willing to add a one-time severance payment of $50,000 to help Mrs. Thorne transition to her new, less extravagant life, but anything more than that is simply extortion. Julian leaned back in his chair, suppressing a victorious smile. It was brutal, yes, but entirely necessary. He needed Elena completely out of the picture, professionally and legally. Sophia, his 24-year-old social media brand ambassador, whom he'd met at a launch party in Ibiza, was pressuring him mercilessly. She wanted the ring, the title, and the sprawling $60 million mansion in Malibu. Elena was merely an artifact of his past, a painful reminder of the days when he was a struggling coder working out of a leaky garage, and she was the waitress who brought him stale coffee and encouraged his ambition. He had long since outgrown her, replacing sentiment with financial success. Mrs. Thorne. Judge Sterling turned his weary gaze to Elena. Your counsel has been remarkably silent today, opting only for procedural motions. Do you have anything to say before I issue my ruling? Elena's lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Sarah Jenkins, who looked visibly overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity and wealth of Blackwood's legal team, stood up shakily. Your Honor, we believe the prenup was signed under duress and without full financial disclosure. Duress? Blackwood laughed, a short, sharp barking sound. She signed it 2 weeks before the wedding in the presence of a certified notary and 2 witnesses. There was no gun to her head, Counselor. She was young, Your Honor, Jenkins argued weakly, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't understand the full scope of Mr. Thorne's future potential. Potential is not assets, the judge snapped, cutting her off. You cannot claim half of a fortune that didn't exist based on a future gamble, Counselor. The law is explicit and clear. If there is no documented evidence of fraud or coercion, the contract stands. Julian pulled out his phone under the table, obscuring the screen with his thigh. A text from Sophia popped up immediately. Asterisk, is it done yet? The jet is fueled. Champagne is on ice. Zoxo. He typed back swiftly. Asterisk 5 minutes. Judge is signing now. He glanced at Elena again. She hadn't looked at him once during the entire proceeding. He felt a flicker of annoyance, quickly escalating into resentment. Why couldn't she just look at him? Why did she have to make this entire process so pathetic and drawn out? If she had simply agreed to the initial settlement, they could have done this quietly. But no, she had to drag it out, forcing him to air their dirty laundry in court, forcing him to hire Blackwood to publicly humiliate her. Very well. Judge Sterling sighed heavily, reaching for the heavy stack of paperwork that would officially dissolve the marriage of Julian and Elena Thorne. I see no reason to prolong the inevitable. The court upholds the validity of the 2003 prenuptial agreement. Mr. Thorne is granted full ownership of Thor Enterprises, the Malibu property, and the Manhattan penthouse. Mrs. Thorne is awarded the stipulated settlement. The judge dipped his substantial fountain pen into the black inkwell. The distinct, immediate scratching sound of the nib hitting the paper was imminent. The courtroom fell silent, a breathless, suffocating quiet. This was it, the end of an era, and Julian felt his tense muscles finally relax. He was free. Wait, the voice was soft, barely a whisper. Yet in the absolute silence of the packed courtroom, it carried with the clear resonance of a scream. Judge Sterling paused, the tip of his gold pen hovering mere millimeters from the signature line. He looked up, intensely annoyed by the interruption. Excuse me, Mrs. Thorne? Elena Thorne stood up slowly. She didn't look at her lawyer. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at Julian. For the first time in months, their eyes met across the aisle. Julian expected to see tears, desperation, or perhaps searing anger. Instead, he saw something that made a cold, terrifying shiver run down his spine, settling deep in his stomach. He saw profound pity. Mrs. Thorne, the judge warned, his voice hardening. Unless you have a legal objection based on substantive evidence, Sit down immediately. I have evidence, Elena said, her voice gaining strength and clarity. It was no longer the wavering, hesitant voice of a defeated, abandoned housewife. It was steady, controlled, and almost jarringly professional. Arthur Blackwood audibly rolled his eyes. Your Honor, this is quite obviously a desperate delay tactic. We have gone thoroughly through discovery. All relevant documents have been submitted to the court. Not all of them, Elena countered calmly. She reached down into her old, worn leather tote, the kind of bag a mother carries snacks and bandages in, looking woefully out of place next to Blackwood's sleek Italian leather briefcase. She pulled out the manila envelope. It wasn't new. The edges were dog-eared from storage, and there was a faint but distinct coffee stain on one corner. This, Elena said, holding the envelope up high for the court to see, was not part of discovery because it does not pertain to the 2003 prenuptial agreement. Then it is irrelevant and inadmissible. Blackwood barked instantly. It pertains, Elena continued, ignoring him completely and walking purposefully toward the bench, to the revocation of that agreement. Julian frowned deeply. Revocation? He had never signed a revocation. What was she possibly talking about? He looked at Blackwood, but his lawyer looked just as confused and distinctly worried. Approach the bench, Judge Sterling commanded, his curiosity suddenly piqued. Elena walked to the bench and carefully placed the envelope on the judge's desk. She then turned and placed a duplicate copy on Blackwood's table. What is this garbage? Blackwood muttered under his breath, opening the clasp with thinly veiled disdain. Julian leaned over his lawyer's shoulder to look. Inside was a single document, handwritten hastily on hotel stationery. The embossed letterhead clearly read, The Ritz-Carlton, Paris. The date was 7 years ago. Julian stared, transfixed at the handwriting. It was messy, aggressively scrawled in deep blue ink, erratic and jagged. The script of a man desperate and likely intoxicated. It was unmistakably his handwriting. His heart skipped a beat, then began to pound an erratic rhythm against his ribs. A memory, hazy and violently buried under years of expensive whiskey, arrogance, and denial, began to claw its way painfully to the surface. Paris, the anniversary trip, the night he had been caught making a colossal mistake, and begged her, tearfully, to stay. What is this? Judge Sterling asked, reading the document intently through his spectacles. It is a post-nuptial contract, Your Honor, Elena said clearly, her voice steady and factual. Drafted and signed by Julian Thorne on October 14, 2018. In it, he stipulates that the previous prenuptial agreement of 2003 is rendered null and void, and it outlines completely new, separate terms for the division of assets should he ever file for divorce or be found guilty of an act of infidelity. Blackwood laughed. A high, nervous sound that didn't reach his eyes. This is a cocktail napkin scribble. This isn't a legal document, Your Honor. It's a drunken love letter. A joke. Read the bottom, Your Honor, Elena prompted gently. The judge looked at the bottom of the page. It is signed by Julian Thorne. He squinted, leaning closer to the document. And, he continued, his voice heavy with disbelief, it is notarized. There was a notary stationed in the hotel lobby at the time, Elena said simply. Julian insisted on it. He wanted to prove to me that he was serious. He wanted to prove he wouldn't hurt me again. Julian felt the blood entirely drain from his face, leaving him cold and clammy. He remembered now. The memory returned with a sickening wave of nausea. He had been drunk, hysterical with desperation, trying frantically to cover up an affair with his executive secretary that threatened to go public right before his company's massive IPO. He had promised Elena everything just to keep her quiet, to keep her polished, stable presence by his side for the cameras. He had signed it, laughed about the ridiculousness of his own panic the next morning, and forgotten it entirely, assuming she had thrown the sentimental piece of paper away. She hadn't thrown it away. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, gravelly register. Does your client recognize this signature and this document? Blackwood looked at Julian, panic rising in his eyes. Julian was frozen, unable to speak. If he denied it, he would be committing perjury, and the notary stamp looked distressingly authentic. If he admitted it, "What does it say?" Julian whispered, his voice cracking with dry fear. "What does the damn thing say?" Elena turned her calm gaze to him, a small, subtle smile, not triumphant, but saw-like and cutting, playing on her lips. "Says Julian, that if you cheat on me again or if you try to leave me for another woman, I get everything." She paused, letting the single word hang in the silent, thick air. Everything. The silence in the courtroom following Elena's declaration was absolute, profound. Even the court stenographer stopped typing, her fingers hovering motionless over the keys, her eyes wide with shock. Arthur Blackwood was the first professional to recover his composure. He was a shark, and sharks didn't stop swimming just because there was blood in the water, even if it was the blood of his own client. He slammed his hand down on the table, a sudden violent crack. "Objection. This is an ambush, Your Honor. This document was not disclosed during discovery. It is absolutely inadmissible." "On the contrary, Mr. Blackwood," Elena said calmly. She no longer looked like the meek, defeated housewife. Her posture had straightened, her shoulders back. She looked like a woman who had been holding her breath for years and had finally, gloriously exhaled. Section 4, Paragraph B of your discovery request asked for all formal legal contracts drafted by law firms. This contract was not drafted by a law firm. It was drafted by Julian and signed in a moment of extreme, self-initiated duress. She paused, her eyes challenging Blackwood. "Furthermore, I am introducing it now as rebuttal evidence to impeach the witness's credibility regarding his financial disclosures to this court." Judge Sterling looked down at Elena over the rim of his glasses. "You know your procedure, Mrs. Thorne. I was a paralegal before I met Julian, Your Honor," she said softly, her voice carrying a steely edge. "Top of my class at UCLA Law Extension. I gave up my career to support his dream of building Thor Enterprises." Julian stared at her, a devastating realization crashing through his arrogance. He had forgotten so much about her. He had rewritten their entire history in his head, casting her as a simpleton, a lucky girl he had rescued from obscurity. He had forgotten that, in the earliest critical days, she was the one who proofread his chaotic early contracts. She was the one who organized his desperate, fragmented business plans. "I need a recess," Blackwood demanded, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. "I need to examine this document. I need to consult with my client immediately." 5 minutes. Judge Sterling grunted, slamming the gavel down with sharp finality. "Do not leave the building." As the gavel banged, the courtroom erupted into a chaotic sea of murmurs and the rapid clicking of reporters' cameras. Julian didn't move. He felt like the marble floor had opened up and swallowed him whole. "You idiot!" Blackwood hissed at him, leaning in so close that the cluster of reporters in the back couldn't hear the professional insult. "You signed a postnup in Paris, and you didn't see fit to tell me, your high-priced attorney?" "I was drunk," Julian hissed back, his face flushing a painful, angry red. "It was 7 years ago. I thought it was a joke. I didn't think she kept it. I didn't think it was legal." "Everything is legal if a judge says it is, Julian," Blackwood snapped, his voice tight with professional betrayal. "And Sterling hates liars. If that notary stamp is real, you are in serious, catastrophic trouble." "Fix it," Julian growled, grabbing Blackwood's arm in a desperate grip. "That's what I pay you $3,000 an hour for. Destroy her. Destroy the document. I don't care how." "It's too late to destroy the document," Blackwood said, pulling his arm away with a grimace of distaste. "She's already entered it into evidence. Our only play now is to prove she coerced you, that you weren't of sound mind, or that the document is a forgery." "It's not a forgery," Julian admitted, looking miserably at the table. "I remember the notary, a little French guy with a meticulous mustache. I gave him €100 to stamp it fast." Blackwood rubbed his temples, his patience dissolving. Then we go with coercion. We paint her as a sophisticated manipulator, a blackmailer. We say she got you drunk on purpose to entrap you at a vulnerable moment. The recess ended all too quickly. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. The judge was no longer looking at Julian with tired respect. He was looking at him with intense suspicion. Blackwood stood up, buttoning his jacket, ready to go instantly on the offensive. Your Honor, we move to dismiss this so-called contract. My client has no verifiable recollection of this event. Furthermore, if such a document exists, it was clearly signed while my client was heavily intoxicated and under extreme emotional duress, having been manipulated by a woman who knew she was rapidly losing her grip on a high-value financial asset. He turned his cold eyes directly on Elena. Mrs. Thorne, isn't it true that in 2018 your marriage was already severely failing? Isn't it true that you were intensely jealous of Mr. Thorne's success? That you felt entitled to his money? Elena stood in the witness box, calm and steady. I was jealous of his time, yes. I missed my husband. He was rarely ever home. And so you trapped him, Blackwood pressed, his voice rising in manufactured outrage. You took him to Paris. You plied him with expensive alcohol, and you forced him to sign a napkin to soothe your own deep-seated financial insecurities. It's not a napkin, Elena said calmly, correcting him precisely. It's Ritz-Carlton stationery, and Julian wasn't just drunk. He was guilty. Objection. Blackwood shouted instantly. Overruled, Judge Sterling said, waving the objection away. The witness will explain her statement. Elena took a deep breath, her eyes softening slightly with remembered pain. We were in Paris because I had found explicit emails between Julian and his assistant, Veronica. He begged me for a second chance. He said he would do anything, absolutely anything, to prove he was committed to saving our marriage. He wrote the terms himself. He said, and I quote from the document, I want to make it so expensive for me to cheat that you'll know I never will again. A ripple of dark, ironic laughter went through the public gallery of the courtroom. And did he cheat again, Mrs. Thorne? Judge Sterling asked, leaning forward, his interest now completely focused on Elena. Elena looked directly at Julian, whose eyes were wide and pleading with her silently. Don't do it. Don't ruin me. Yes, Your Honor, Elena said, her voice remaining perfectly measured. With Sophia Hart and 3 others before her. Lies, Julian shouted, standing up violently, causing his chair to scrape backward. She's lying. Sit down, Mr. Thorne, the judge bellowed, slamming his fist on the bench. I have the flight logs, Your Honor, Elena continued, her voice unwavering as if Julian hadn't spoken. I have the credit card statements, the detailed jewelry purchase receipts, the hotel bookings, and the expense reports. I kept everything. For 7 years, I kept everything. She pulled another folder from her battered tote bag. It was thicker this time, bulging with paper. This is the proof of the breach of the contract, she said. Blackwood looked like he was about to collapse from a massive stroke. He had walked confidently into a minefield, thinking it was a secure playground. He had underestimated Elena Thorne, exactly as Julian had. They had seen a quiet, submissive wife. They had failed entirely to see the meticulous, top-of-her-class paralegal who had been gathering evidence, biding her time, waiting for the exact legal moment when Julian would be most exposed and vulnerable. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Sterling said, his voice like grinding gravel. It appears your client has not been entirely forthcoming with the court regarding his personal affairs. If this contract holds and the infidelity is proven, the terms of this 2018 agreement will supersede and nullify the 2003 prenup entirely. Your Honor, we request a continuance. Blackwood stammered, scrambling to save face. We urgently need to verify the authenticity of the notary stamp. We need to hire a forensic handwriting expert immediately. Granted, the judge said sternly. But be warned, Mr. Thorne. If this document comes back as authentic, and if I find out Mr. Thorne lied to this court about his assets or his actions, I will not look kindly on him during the division of property. We reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. The gavel banged heavily. Julian slumped miserably in his expensive chair, his facade utterly shattered. He looked over at Elena. She was calmly packing her worn bag, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't look triumphant. She looked utterly exhausted. As she passed his table on her way out, Julian lunged and grabbed her wrist, his grip desperate. "Elena," he hissed, his voice low and vicious. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're going to tank the stock price. You're going to destroy the entire company." Elena looked down calmly at his hand on her wrist until, shamed by the visibility of his desperation, he slowly let go. "You destroyed the marriage, Julian," she said softly, walking away without looking back. "I'm just liquidating the assets." That night, Julian Thorne didn't sleep a wink. He paced the entire circumference of his sprawling penthouse suite at the Four Seasons, a tumbler of expensive scotch trembling in his hand. The commanding view of the glittering Los Angeles skyline usually calmed him, a constant, tangible reminder that he owned the city and controlled his destiny. But tonight, the countless lights looked like thousands of accusing, judgmental eyes staring back at him. His phone had been buzzing nonstop on the marble counter. Sophia. "Baby, what is happening? Why is the lawyer calling me? Why aren't we on the plane?" He ignored her. He couldn't deal with Sophia's shallow, constant demands right now. He was thinking obsessively about the ghost of Paris, as he had started calling the document in his head. He remembered the catastrophic night clearly now. The memory had returned with the violent, nauseating clarity of a flash of lightning. The Ritz, the heavy rain against the window, the way he had been crying. Actually crying, begging Elena not to leave him. He had loved her then, perhaps, in his own twisted, supremely selfish way. Or maybe, he realized grimly, he just needed her stability to maintain the image of his life. Arthur Blackwood sat slumped on the leather sofa, looking utterly disheveled. He had discarded his silk tie, his collar was loosened, and he was grimly reviewing the copy of the handwritten document. "It's watertight, Julian," Blackwood said, his voice grim and defeated. "I've had 3 senior partners review it overnight. The language is simple, almost comically blunt, but it is legally binding. In the event of infidelity, all marital assets, including your majority shares in Thor Enterprises, transfer to Elena Thorne. You didn't just give her half, Julian. You gave her everything." "I was trying to be dramatic," Julian moaned, burying his face in his hands, his desperation overwhelming. "I thought it was romantic." "It's not romantic, Julian. It's corporate and financial suicide," Blackwood snapped. "And the notary, Henri Dubois, he's retired now, living in Lyon. We tracked him down. He remembers you specifically. He remembers you giving him a massive €100 tip and saying, quote, 'This is the most important paper I'll ever sign.'" Julian groaned, running his fingers through his hair. "So what do we do? Settlement? Buy her off?" "She won't settle," Blackwood said flatly. "Why would she? She has you by the throat. If the judge enforces this, you walk away with the clothes on your back and maybe your gym membership. The company goes to her. The board will oust you immediately. You'll be a pariah in every circle that matters." "There has to be a way out," Julian insisted, his eyes wide and panicked. "She's mentally unstable. We can prove that. She sees a therapist. She has for years. Lots of successful people see therapists, Julian. That doesn't void a legally notarized contract," Blackwood retorted wearily. "What about the infidelity clause?" Julian asked, grasping desperately at the last, thinnest straw. "Maybe we can prove she cheated. If she cheated, the contract is void, right? It was about mutual fidelity." Blackwood looked at him with profound skepticism and exhaustion. "Did she?" "I don't know," Julian shouted, throwing his hands up. "She's been going to the public library 3 times a week for years. Maybe she has a lover, a librarian, a gardener, anyone. Find someone." Blackwood sighed, standing up and retrieving his discarded tie. "I can put a private investigator on it tonight, but honestly, Julian, I wouldn't hold my breath." "But Julian, look at her. She's not the type for scandal. She has spent 2 decades raising your children. hosting your endless parties, and running your mansion while you were jetting around the world with models and influencers. She's the picture of boring virtue. Just do it, Julian commanded, his voice raw with panic. Find dirt. Find anything. Dig into her past, her family's history, her childhood report cards. I want to know if she jaywalked in 1995. I want to know if she cheated on a remedial math test in 3rd grade. If we can completely impeach her character, maybe, just maybe, the judge will throw out the postnup as unconscionable. Blackwood slowly stood up, looking like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. I'll make the calls, he said, his voice flat. But Julian, prepare yourself. Tomorrow is going to be a bloodbath. She has the flight logs. The next morning, the courtroom was not merely full. It was packed solid, sweating under the glare of global attention. Word had leaked through the courthouse walls like sewage. The TMZ headline read in screaming caps, "Billionaire's billion-dollar mistake. The napkin that could cost Thorne Enterprises everything." Reporters were jostling violently outside the doors, elbowing each other for a better angle. Cameras flashed in a blinding strobe as Julian entered, flanked by a phalanx of silent security guards. He wore oversized, dark sunglasses to hide the purple bags of exhaustion under his eyes, the remnants of a sleepless night spent arguing with his lawyer. Elena arrived alone, eschewing the black town car for a simple taxi. She wore a pristine, brilliantly white suit today. It was sharp, meticulously tailored, and utterly devoid of frills. It looked like professional armor. When Judge Sterling, an elderly woman known for her severe demeanor and sharp legal mind, banged the gavel, the tension in the room became palpable, thick enough to choke on. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge began, her voice crisp, "have you reviewed the document outlining the definition of infidelity, as requested?" "We have, Your Honor," Blackwood said, standing up on shaky legs. He looked utterly defeated before he even opened his mouth. "However, we contest the definition of infidelity as stated in the document. The contract specifies physical infidelity. My client maintains that his relationship with Ms. Hart was purely emotional until after the separation date, a purely intellectual connection that did not cross the line. It was a weak lie, threadbare and desperate, and every single person in the room, from the judge to the stenographer, knew it was fabricated." Elena's lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, stood up. She looked more confident and freshly energized than the day before. "Your Honor," Jenkins began, her voice ringing clearly, "I would like to call our first witness to the stand regarding the timeline of the affair, which we believe invalidates the defense's claim. Ms. Sophia Hart." Julian's head snapped up violently, his sunglasses flying off his nose and clattering onto the expensive mahogany table. "What?" The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom opened, sucking the air out of the room. Sophia Hart walked in. She wasn't wearing her usual blindingly expensive designer clothes, but a modest, simple black dress that somehow made her look more severe. She looked furious, but her anger was not directed at Elena. She was glaring, white-hot, directly at Julian. Julian felt a pit open in his stomach, a dizzying, abyssal drop. He had ignored her frantic calls all night. He had literally left her stranded at the airport when his legal troubles began. She was a woman scorned, and she had just been handed a microphone in front of the entire world. "Ms. Hart," Sarah Jenkins said gently, as Sophia took the stand, her back ramrod straight. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "I was happy to come," Sophia said, her voice like grinding ice. She didn't break eye contact with Julian. "He told me he was divorced. He told me it was over years ago and that his wife was just a miserable roommate." "When did your relationship with Mr. Thorne begin?" "August 2023, Sophia stated clearly. "And were you aware that he was still living with his wife at that time?" "He told me they were roommates. He said she was crazy. He said she slept in the basement." She scoffed, a look of utter disgust crossing her face. "He lied about everything." "And did you travel with him extensively during that time?" "Yes. Cabo, Paris, Tokyo." "And during these trips," Jenkins asked, leaning in, "did you share a room?" "Yes." "And did you engage in physical intimacy?" "Objection," Blackwood shouted, leaping to his feet. Relevance. This is character assassination, not proof of contract violation. It goes to the core definition of the contract, Your Honor, Jenkins retorted immediately. The contract specifies physical infidelity, which we are establishing clearly now. Overruled, Judge Sterling said without glancing at Blackwood. Answer the question, Ms. Hart. Sophia looked Julian dead in the eye, savoring the moment of his ruin. Yes, she said, her voice steady and deliberate. Every night, the courtroom erupted into a chaotic, roaring wave of noise. Julian sank impossibly lower in his chair, feeling the weight of the cameras and the judgment. It was over. The infidelity was proven beyond doubt. The contract was triggered. But Blackwood wasn't entirely done yet. He leaned over, his mouth close to Julian's ear. The PI found something, he whispered, barely audible over the din. It's a long shot, a Hail Mary pass, but it's all we have left. Blackwood stood up as Sophia left the stand, pausing to give Julian one last poisonous look. Your Honor, while the defense acknowledges the complications of Mr. Thorne's personal life, we move now to invalidate the entire 2018 contract on the grounds of fraudulent inducement. Explain, Judge Sterling said, looking utterly bored with the predictable theatrics. The contract, Blackwood said, pulling a crisp piece of paper from his briefcase, states explicitly that Elena Thorne must be a faithful and loyal spouse. It is a necessary condition of the entire agreement. However, we have substantial reason to believe that Mrs. Thorne was not faithful. Elena's face, which had been perfectly composed, didn't change, but her hand tightened on the edge of the table, knuckles white. We have evidence, Blackwood lied smoothly, bluffing with the flimsy information the PI had barely scraped together, that Mrs. Thorne has been maintaining a secret, undeclared bank account. An account that has received monthly payments from a man named Elias Vance for the last 5 years. Elena's eyes widened slightly, not in fear, Julian noted, but in genuine shock. Who is Elias Vance? Judge Sterling asked, raising a finely sculpted eyebrow. We believe he is a lover, Blackwood declared triumphantly. And if she had a lover, she violated the spirit of the contract first. Therefore, the postnuptial agreement is void, and the original prenup, which awards her a paltry $5 million, stands. Julian looked at Elena. She looked genuinely rattled for the first time since this entire catastrophe began. Had she cheated? Was there an Elias? He felt a sudden, exhilarating surge of hope. If she was dirty, too, if she was a hypocrite, he could still win. Mrs. Thorne, the judge asked, leaning forward. Who is Elias Vance? Elena stood up slowly, her face pale, the white of her suit suddenly seeming too stark. Elias Vance, she started, her voice trembling slightly, betraying her years of carefully built composure. Elias Vance is not my lover, Your Honor. Then who is he? Blackwood challenged, practically vibrating with anticipation. He is. Elena paused, looking directly at the blinding cameras, then turning her gaze to Julian. He is my brother. Julian frowned, confused. You don't have a brother, he muttered loud enough for his lawyer to hear. You told me you were an only child. You told me your parents died when you were young. I lied, Elena whispered, the lie echoing in the sudden silence of the court. Because Elias is in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Those payments Blackwood found? They were for his legal appeals, high-powered lawyers I hired to try and save him. The courtroom fell silent again, the narrative abruptly shifting from petty infidelity to profound, secret sacrifice. And where did you acquire the money for these appeals? Blackwood asked, sensing a new, smaller trap, but unable to stop himself. You have no professional income. Elena looked directly at Julian, her eyes hardening like polished diamonds. I sold the jewelry, she said, her voice steady now, cutting through the silence. The diamonds you bought me every time you cheated. The apology bracelets. The sorry I missed your birthday necklaces. The don't leave me emerald rings. I sold them all piece by piece over the last 5 years. I used your guilt to pay for his freedom. Julian stared at her, horrified. He had bought her millions of dollars worth of jewelry, mountains of shimmering gilt, and she had been systematically liquidating it right under his nose, funding a secret life he knew absolutely nothing about. That is dissipation of marital assets, Blackwood shouted, recovering slightly. She sold property acquired during the marriage. No, Judge Sterling cut in sharply. Those were gifts, given freely to Mrs. Thorne. They became her personal property to do with as she pleased. Mr. Blackwood, your fraud defense has collapsed, dramatically so. Your client is an admitted adulterer who signed a legally binding postnuptial agreement. The witness has confirmed the infidelity. The handwriting is verified. Unless you have a magical rabbit to pull out of a hat, I am ready to rule. Blackwood slumped back into his seat, utterly defeated. He had nothing left. However, Elena said, her voice suddenly cutting through the room with unexpected volume and clarity. There is one more thing, Your Honor. Julian looked up, bewildered. What more could she possibly want? She had already won the money. The contract, Elena said, picking up the yellowing document and pointing precisely to a small paragraph. Clause 4. She read the clause aloud for the record. In the event of a divorce triggered by infidelity, Julian Thorne agrees to immediately resign as CEO of Thorne Enterprises and transfer his majority voting rights to Elena Thorne. A collective gasp went through the room, louder than the previous shouting match. Julian stood up so quickly he knocked his expensive chair over. No, he shrieked, his composure entirely gone. You can't take the company. You can't run a tech giant. You're a housewife. Elena turned to him. She didn't shout back. She just smiled. A cold, predatory smile that reminded him terrifyingly of himself 10 years ago, before success had softened him. I haven't just been a housewife, Julian, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. I've been listening for 20 years. I sat at your dinner parties. I listened to your board meetings when you took them on speakerphone at home. I proofread your patents when you couldn't be bothered. I know where the bodies are buried. I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. I know about the tax evasion in 2019. She leaned in slightly, a conquering queen surveying her captive. I don't just want the money, Julian. I want the throne. The glass skyscraper of Thorne Enterprises pierced the Los Angeles smog like a shard of ice. On the 42nd floor, the board of directors sat around a massive table in a room that smelled only of expensive, stale coffee and visceral fear. They had all seen the news. The video of Sophia Hart's testimony had gone instantly viral, garnering 20 million views in less than 12 hours. Thorne Enterprises stock had dipped a catastrophic 12% at the opening bell. Uncertainty was bad for business, and Julian Thorne was now a walking, talking, internationally humiliated liability. Julian paced frantically at the head of the table, his silk tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and too much adrenaline. He looked exactly like a cornered animal about to savage its handler. It's a temporary setback, Julian shouted, slamming his hand repeatedly on the polished mahogany. The judge hasn't issued the final decree yet. We can appeal. We can tie this up in court for 10 years. I am not stepping down. I built this company from a garage in Palo Alto. Richard Caldwell, the silver-haired chairman of the board, a man whose eyes were like cold flint, cleared his throat delicately. Julian, the optics are disastrous. The morality clause in your employment contract is specific and ironclad. The public hates you right now, and frankly, the shareholders are panicking. We've received emergency calls from our 3 biggest institutional investors. I don't care about the investors, Julian roared, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. I am the visionary. Without me, this company is nothing but a glorified server farm. The heavy, soundproof double doors of the boardroom swung open. The room fell into an unnerving silence. Julian spun around, ready to scream at his assistant for daring to interrupt, but it wasn't his assistant. Elena Thorne stood framed in the doorway. She wasn't wearing the simple navy dress of the day before. She was wearing a tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than his old car. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders in professional, controlled waves. She held a sleek, leather portfolio under her arm. Behind her walked 2 men. A court-appointed trustee in a dark suit, and a large, serious security guard with a stone face. "Gentlemen," Elena said, her voice smooth and commanding, requiring no raise in volume to be heard clearly over the silence. "And Julian, get out!" Julian hissed, his veins bulging in his neck, the picture of impotent fury. "Security, remove this woman immediately." The large security guard behind Elena simply stepped forward, crossing his muscular arms. He was looking only at Julian, not Elena. "The security team answers to the majority shareholder," he stated flatly. "Julian," Elena said, walking calmly toward the table, never breaking her stride. "As of Judge Sterling's preliminary injunction issued at 8:02 a.m. this morning, my voting rights have been activated pending the final transfer of assets. I control 51% of the voting stock." She reached the head of the table where Julian was still standing, trembling. She stopped and looked at him. She didn't say a word. She just waited. The silence stretched, agonizing and heavy, filling the vast room. Julian looked desperately at the board members. They were all looking down at their papers, checking their phones, or examining the expensive wood grain of the table. No one met his eye. No one stood up for the visionary. "Richard," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking, looking at the chairman. "You're going to let her do this? She was a waitress. She doesn't know the difference between an algorithm and an alligator." Richard Caldwell sighed heavily and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Julian, she holds the proxy. Sit down or leave." Defeated, shrunken, Julian stepped aside. Elena took the seat at the head of the table, claiming the center of power. She placed her portfolio on the mahogany surface and opened it. "Thank you, Richard," she said, nodding efficiently to the chairman. "Now let's get to business. I've been reviewing the quarterly reports for the last 5 years. I've noticed some serious irregularities in the R&D budget regarding Project Chimera." Julian froze near the door. He hadn't yet managed to leave. He turned back, his face draining of color. "Project Chimera is classified," Julian stammered, horrified. "It's top secret. It's money laundering." Elena corrected him instantly, her eyes locking onto his. "You've been funneling company funds into shell companies in the Caymans to pay for your hedonistic lifestyle and cover up massive gambling debts in Macau. I found the ledgers in your home office safe 3 years ago. I made copies." The board members gasped collectively. Richard Caldwell looked absolutely furious. "Is this true, Julian?" "She's lying," Julian screamed, truly losing control. "She hacked me. It's illegal evidence. It's corporate malfeasance," Elena said coldly, ignoring his outburst. "And as the new acting CEO, I am authorizing a full, uncompromising forensic audit of the company finances, effective immediately." She turned to the security guard standing near the door. "Please escort Mr. Thorne out of the building. His security clearance is revoked immediately. He is not to take any devices or documents." 2 more guards appeared swiftly at the door. They flanked Julian. "You can't do this," Julian shrieked as they grabbed his arms. "I am Julian Thorne. My name is on the building. We'll see about changing the sign next week," Elena said, not even looking up as she began to read the agenda. Next item: restructuring the HR department to address the hostile work environment complaints that were systematically ignored by the previous administration. As Julian was dragged out of the boardroom, kicking and screaming like a petulant, oversized child, he caught one last glimpse of his wife. She didn't look triumphant or vengeful. She looked utterly efficient. She looked exactly like a CEO. And for the first time, he realized that while he was busy building the technology, she had been busy quietly building herself. The descent was rapid and brutal. Within 48 hours of the boardroom coup, Julian Thorne had lost his company, his reputation, and his palatial home. The judge had frozen his personal accounts, pending the massive audit Elena had ordered. Julian sat on the edge of a lumpy, stained mattress in a budget motel near the airport. The neon sign outside blinked a cheap, buzzing pink through the thin, polyester curtains. It was a humiliating, light-years-distant nightmare from the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons. He checked his phone, a cheap burner he'd bought at a convenience store. No new messages. Sophia Hart had blocked him on everything. Her publicist had released a sanctimonious statement saying she was shocked and appalled by Mr. Thorne's deception, and was taking time to heal and focus on her charity work. Charity work. The only charity Sophia had ever cared about was filling her own closet. He threw the phone against the wall. Cracked but didn't break. Elena, he muttered, the name tasting like bile and ash in his mouth. You think you've won? You think you can just erase me? He stood up and went to the mini-fridge, pulling out a warm, cheap beer. He needed a plan. He couldn't fight her in court anymore. Blackwood had quit after his retainer check bounced. He needed something darker, something far outside the constraints of the law. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled business card. A man he had met years ago at a high-stakes, illegal poker game in Vegas. A man who fixed problems that lawyers wouldn't touch or couldn't. Silas Graves, Risk Management. Julian dialed the number. Graves, a voice answered. It sounded exactly like gravel crunching under heavy tires. This is Julian Thorne. There was a significant pause on the other end. I saw the news, Thorne. Tough break. The wife took the kingdom. Huh? I want it back, Julian said, his voice shaking with tightly controlled rage. I want to destroy her. I want to humiliate her the way she humiliated me in front of the world. That costs money, Graves said simply. And I hear your accounts are currently frozen solid. I have a stash, Julian lied instantly. Crypto. Untraceable. I can transfer you 50,000 tonight, another 100 when the job is done. What's the job? She's playing the saint, Julian whispered, pacing the small, dirty room, adrenaline beginning to rush. She's playing the victim and the feminist icon. I want you to plant something in her office or on her computer. Fabricated evidence that she's selling classified user data to foreign governments or massive embezzlement. Anything that gets the feds involved. I want her in handcuffs, Silas. I want her in a cell just like her brother. Corporate espionage. Frame up? Graves mused. Classic. Risky but doable. I need access to the main server room. I still have my old admin codes, Julian said, his breathing quickening. They revoked my badge, but they didn't wipe the hard-coded backdoors I built into the system 10 years ago. I can get you in remotely if you can get physical access to the building. Meet me at the pier in Santa Monica in an hour, Graves said. Bring the crypto key. Julian hung up. A dark, ugly smile spread across his face. He felt a surge of the old, intoxicating adrenaline. He wasn't out of the game yet. He was Julian Thorne. He was a genius. Elena was just a paralegal with a grudge. She wouldn't see this coming. Meanwhile, across the city, Elena was sitting in what used to be Julian's massive, imposing office. It was strange being in this chair. The expensive leather was still worn into the shape of his body. She had already ordered a replacement. Her phone buzzed. It was her brother, Elias. Hey, El. His voice came through, tiny and distant from the prison phone. I saw you on TV in the rec room. You looked powerful. I'm doing this for us, Elias, she said, the ruthless CEO persona instantly dropping away, replaced by genuine, soft concern. The audit is already uncovering the shell companies Julian used. Once we track the money flow, we can prove that the embezzlement you were framed for was actually him shifting assets to the Caymans. We're going to get you out. Just be careful, Elias warned, his voice low. Julian is a narcissist. He won't just go away quietly. When you corner a rat, it bites. Let him bite, Elena said, looking out at the glittering landscape of the city lights she now commanded. I have the antidote ready. She hung up and looked at the stack of critical files on her desk. She was physically exhausted, but she couldn't stop. She had to prove to the board and to herself that she could actually run this technological behemoth. She pressed the intercom button. Margaret, send in the CTO, please. The door opened and David Chun, the chief technology officer, walked in. He looked visibly nervous. Everyone was nervous around her these days. David, Elena said warmly, motioning to a chair. Sit down. I want to talk about the encryption protocols on the main server. Yes, Mrs. Thorne. I want them changed tonight. Every single admin key, every legacy backdoor, every hard-coded override. reset everything. David blinked, stunned. That will take the system offline for 6 hours, minimum. It's a massive undertaking, Mrs. Thorne. Why the urgency? Call it a hunch, Elena said, tapping her pen precisely on the desk. I know how Julian thinks. He thinks he's the only one who knows the secrets of this building. I want to make sure that when he tries to use his old master keys, he finds the locks have all been changed. David nodded, understanding immediately the strategic necessity. I'll get the team on it right away. Elena watched him leave. She hoped she was fast enough. She knew Julian. He wouldn't attack her physically. He was a coward. He would attack her credibility. He would try to make her look incompetent or criminal. She opened her laptop and pulled up the security feed for the building lobby. She watched the remaining employees leaving for the night. Life went on. But in the deep shadows of the Santa Monica Pier, Julian was handing a thin USB drive to a man with a jagged scar running down his cheek. The game of cat and mouse wasn't over. It had just entered the sudden death round. 2 weeks later, Thorne Enterprises was stabilizing. The stock had rebounded dramatically as Elena announced a new, ethical direction for the company, prioritizing transparency and user data privacy. The public loved the narrative of the scorned wife cleaning up the corrupt tech giant. She was being hailed globally as a feminist icon of corporate change. Julian watched the news report from a prepaid smartphone in a rented car parked directly across the street from the shimmering headquarters. He was eating a cold, greasy burger, the fat staining his fingers. Enjoy it while it lasts, honey, he muttered to the screen. Next to him sat Silas Graves, whose scarred face was illuminated by the glow of a laptop connected to the building's Wi-Fi via a specialized, high-gain antenna mounted on the dashboard. You said the back doors would work, Graves grumbled, annoyance evident in his gravelly voice. They're dead. Every single one. She reset the entire system. Damn it! Julian struck the steering wheel with his fist, wincing. She anticipated it. She knows me too well. We have to go to Plan B, Graves said, closing the laptop decisively. Physical plant. I have a contact on the janitorial staff, a guy who needs to clear some debts. I can get the drive into her office physically, but it's going to cost you double the initial fee for the risk. Just do it, Julian said instantly. I don't care about the money. I want to see her walk out of there in handcuffs. The plan was chillingly simple. Graves' contact, the janitor, would slip into the CEO's office during the night shift and tape a micro SD card containing the fabricated evidence under her desk. Then, an anonymous tip would be called into the FBI claiming that Elena Thorne was storing classified government blueprints stolen from a defense contractor, a crime that carried a swift 20-year sentence. The next morning, the trap was sprung. Elena was in the middle of a strategic meeting with the marketing team when the alarm blared, not the fire alarm, but the harsh, insistent tones of the high-security lockdown alarm. What was going on? She asked, rising slowly from her chair. The question was barely out before her assistant, Margaret, plunged into the room, her usually rosy complexion scrubbed of all color. Mrs. Thorne, it's the FBI. They're downstairs in the lobby. 5 of them. They have a federal warrant. Elena's heart seized, a cold, hard fist tightening beneath her ribs. The FBI. This was Julian. This had to be the final poison play. Let them up, Elena commanded, forcing the words through a dry throat. Her composure was a shield. She absolutely would not allow them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. 5 agents, clad in severe navy windbreakers that seemed to absorb all the light in the elegant corner office, strode in. The lead agent, a tall man with the weary but sharp eyes of a relentless bureaucrat, flashed his ID. I'm Agent Miller, he stated, his voice flat and authoritative. Elena Thorne, we are executing a warrant to search these premises for classified material related to the Department of Defense. You'll find nothing of the sort, Elena replied, her voice steady and edged with genuine disdain. We strictly manage tech infrastructure. We do not engage in defense contracts. We received a highly credible tip, Miller countered, his gaze unflinching. Search the office, gentlemen. The agents moved with practiced surgical efficiency, dissecting the room. Leather-bound books were swept off custom shelving, file cabinets were yanked open, and the antique furniture was scrutinized. Elena moved to the floor-to-ceiling window, hands clasped loosely behind her back, watching the organized chaos. A cold, deep dread settled in her core. If Julian had managed to plant something undeniable, something damning, her meticulously crafted reality would disintegrate. The entire narrative of the queen of the boardroom, the self-made myth, would crumble instantly. She wouldn't be a titan. She would just be another common crook. "Agent Miller!" one of the agents yelled, his voice echoing from beneath the massive, custom-built mahogany desk. He was on one knee, reaching deep into the shadows. He pulled out a small, nondescript black rectangular object taped neatly to the underside of the wood, a micro SD card reader. "Found it," the agent confirmed, holding up the damning evidence. Agent Miller approached, carefully bagging the device. He turned to Elena, the lack of surprise on his face chilling. "Mrs. Thorne, you need to come with us." Elena felt a sudden, dizzying sense of vertigo. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. A setup. A flawless, absolutely undeniable setup. "I didn't put that there," she heard herself say, the sound distant, detached. "You can explain that to the judge," Miller said, the metallic click of handcuffs being separated cutting through the quiet panic. As they escorted her through the building's pristine glass doors, the press was already waiting, a shrieking, volatile mob held back only by inadequate police tape. Julian had ensured the final act played out before the maximum audience. The air exploded with the blinding white strobe of camera flashes. Click, click, click. Reporters shouted over one another. "Elena, did you steal the documents? Is it true you're a spy for a rival firm? Was the Thor Enterprises takeover just a scam?" Elena kept her head held impossibly high, a mask of aristocratic indifference plastered over the raw, internal scream. Then she saw him, Julian, blending into the periphery of the frantic crowd, wearing a dark hoodie and designer sunglasses. He pulled the shades down slightly, just enough to expose his eyes, and delivered a quick, sickening wink. He had won. He had played dirty, ruinously dirty, and he had won. She was roughly pushed into the back of a pristine black FBI SUV. As the heavy door slammed shut, sealing her in, she closed her eyes. But she wasn't defeated. She wasn't crying. She was thinking. Julian had committed one critical, arrogant oversight. He had assumed that because she had started as a waitress, she was technologically illiterate. He forgot the years he struggled at Stanford, the late nights she spent tutoring him in advanced coding. He forgot that she was the one who quietly authored the original bulletproof security kernel for Thor Enterprises 20 years ago, and let him take the credit. And because she knew the system better than the man who claimed to own it, she knew a crucial secret about that CEO's office that Julian had overlooked in his rush to betray her. The office wasn't just a workspace. It was a secure surveillance zone. Julian, years ago, paranoid about his own executives, had installed high-resolution cameras and sophisticated audiobugs to spy on private meetings. He had drunkenly boasted about it to Elena, laughing about how he always knew what everyone was planning. When Elena took control, she hadn't removed them. She had simply rerouted the entire feed, video and audio, to a private, encrypted cloud-based server accessible only by her. If someone had planted that drive under her desk, they were currently starring in a high-definition feature film. Sitting in the back of the FBI car, wrists burning from the cuffs, Elena fixed her intense gaze on Agent Miller's reflection in the rearview mirror. "Agent Miller," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the car's silence. "Before you proceed with the booking, I strongly suggest you check the cloud server at IP address 109, passcode, Nemesis." Miller, who had been focused on the road, frowned and glanced back skeptically. "Why?" "Because," Elena replied, a small, dangerously self-satisfied smile finally touching her lips. "You are going to want to see the movie I made last night. It stars a night janitor, a man named Silas Graves, and one very specific micro SD card." Miller hesitated, his professional skepticism warring with an undeniable curiosity. He pulled his official tablet from his console. Julian, standing triumphant on the sidewalk, watched the black SUV begin to pull away. He felt a scorching surge of total victory. He reached for his phone, ready to call Blackwood, demanding the divorce settlement be immediately reinstated now that the despised heir was a confirmed felon. But then the FBI car stopped. It didn't leave the parking lot entrance. It idled for a long, pregnant moment. Then, with a screech of tires, it executed a precise three-point turn. It was coming back toward the curb. Simultaneously, two other massive black SUVs peeled away from the traffic and pulled up directly where Julian was standing. The doors flew open. Agents poured out, weapons drawn, but they weren't focused on the building or the press. They were all pointing directly at Julian. Julian Thorne. Agent Miller's amplified voice boomed over a loudspeaker, shattering the street noise. Freeze! Federal agents! Julian's expensive phone clattered to the sidewalk. The blood seemed to drain from his face in an instant, leaving him looking like a prematurely aged wax figure. What? He croaked, barely audible. No, that's not how it ends. He spun to flee, pure instinct taking over, but he collided instantly with the massive chest of a waiting agent. He was violently tackled to the concrete, his face scraping against the rough pavement. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, tampering with evidence, and filing a false federal report, the agent formally recited into the chaos. They hauled Julian to his feet, dragging him, humiliated, toward the very first FBI vehicle, the one Elena was still occupying. The tinted passenger window slid silently down. The handcuffs were gone from Elena's wrists. I told you, Julian, she said softly, her voice perfectly audible above the sudden wail of the sirens. I didn't just proofread your contracts. I proofread your code. Julian screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound, as they forcibly shoved him into the second black car. It's not over. It's not over. But as the heavy, steel door slammed shut, sealing him inside the metaphorical cage he had painstakingly built for her, they both knew the painful, undeniable truth. It was over, and the waitress had meticulously served the final, bitter course. The federal trial of Julian Thorne, which the media promptly dubbed the Silicon Valley Reckoning, lasted 3 grueling, high-profile months. Julian, denied bail and stripped of his tailored bespoke suits, looked a mere shadow of the tech titan he once was. His hair was visibly thinning and streaked with gray. His skin was sallow and loose, and his notorious, corrosive arrogance had been replaced by a desperate, twitchy fear that constantly betrayed him. The prosecution, led by the relentless U.S. Attorney Victor Conincade, systematically dismantled Julian's empire piece by piece. The micro SD card setup was merely the preamble. The FBI had subsequently uncovered a decade's worth of intricate tax evasion schemes, institutionalized bribery, and massive international money laundering operations. But the true bombshell, the moment that silenced the often raucous courtroom into a cold vacuum, came when Elena took the stand, presenting a damning financial record known simply as Ledger B. Mrs. Thorne, Conincade asked, his voice slow and deliberate, turning to face the jury. Can you explain the Vance Holdings account found within these ledgers? It was a shadow account Julian systematically used to siphon corporate funds, Elena stated, her voice amplified and eerily clear by the courtroom microphone. He named it after my brother Elias Vance. Conincade paused for dramatic effect, letting the name hang in the air. 5 years ago, Elias Vance was sentenced to federal prison for embezzling $2 million from Thor Enterprises. But this certified audit proves, beyond any doubt, that the transfer originated from Julian Thorne's private terminal, using his unique access code. He framed his wife's only family member to isolate her completely. He sent an innocent man to prison specifically to ensure Mrs. Thorne had no one left to turn to but him. Julian vaulted to his feet, his face turning a startling, congested shade of purple. She's lying. She doctored the logs. This is slander. Sit down. The judge thundered, pounding his gavel repeatedly. The jury no longer needed convincing. The deliberation was swift, the verdict a crushing unanimity. Guilty on all 34 counts. Julian Thorne, the judge announced, peering grimly over his thick glasses at the broken man. You have systematically destroyed lives for personal profit and sport. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, to be served consecutively. Julian's knees finally and completely buckled beneath him, as the bailiffs dragged him away, screaming incoherently that the fight wasn't finished. He frantically searched the packed gallery for Elena. She stood in the back row, poised and steady. She offered no smile, no triumphant wave. She simply nodded once. A quiet, terminal acknowledgement that the crushing debt was finally and irrevocably paid. 2 weeks later, Elena stood outside the tall, chain-link gates of a low-security federal correctional facility in Lompoc, bathed in the early afternoon sun. The steel doors buzzed open with a low, hydraulic sigh, and a thin, weathered man stepped out, shielding his eyes against the intense California light. "Elias," she breathed, her voice thick with pure relief. Her brother looked around, blinking rapidly, until his eyes locked onto hers. They ran toward each other, their reunion less a graceful embrace and more a collapsing, tearful wreck on the side of the dusty road. "I told you," Elena whispered fiercely into the rough fabric of his jacket. "I promised you I would fix it. You took down the giant Elias managed," his voice raw, heavy with 5 years of lost time and emotion. Elena pulled back, wiping the track of her tears with the heel of her hand. "We own the giant now," she corrected, a hint of the boardroom steel returning. "And I have an immediate job opening for a chief financial officer. I need someone I can trust without question." 5 years later, Thor Enterprises had undergone a radical, quiet metamorphosis, reborn as a global leader in ethical technology and sustainable innovation. Elena, now 45, radiated a quiet, unshakable power that needed no validation. Her assistant buzzed in a visitor. Arthur Blackwood, Julian's former shark of a lawyer, the man who had viciously skewered Elena in public, looked utterly defeated and 10 years older than he should have. His prestigious firm had completely dissolved in the wake of the scandal's fallout. "Mrs. Thorne," Blackwood said, clutching his hat awkwardly in his trembling hands, "I came to ask for a job. Any job. No one will hire me. I have substantial debts." Elena looked calmly at the man who had once openly called her a calculating gold digger in front of the world. She picked up a solid silver pen and wrote a number on a small, clean slip of paper. "This is the number for the downtown legal aid clinic," she said, sliding the note across the polished surface of the desk. "They desperately need lawyers for pro bono cases. The pay is terrible, Arthur, and the work is harder than anything you've ever done. Do that for a year. If you can learn how to genuinely help people who can't pay you a dime, come back and see me." Blackwood took the paper with hands that shook slightly, a glimmer of shame replacing his old bravado. "Thank you, Mrs. Thorne." As he shuffled out, Elena walked to the window overlooking the expansive, glittering city that was now hers. The bitter ghost of Paris, the memory of her initial subjugation, was finally laid to rest. Julian was sealed away in a concrete cell. Her brother was safe, exonerated, and thriving, and she was completely free. She picked up her phone, smiling slightly, to call Elias for dinner. The waitress had served the final course, and she had done it entirely and brutally on her own terms. And that is precisely how Elena Thorne transformed a moment of profound public humiliation and personal crisis into the ultimate, quiet victory. She didn't just win a complex divorce. She systematically dismantled a deeply corrupt corporate empire and rescued her family from a man who, until the very last moment, truly believed he was untouchable. Elena Thorne proved irrevocably that the quietest person in the room, the one everyone underestimates, is often the most dangerous. She played the long game with merciless precision, enduring years of calculated disrespect and emotional abuse simply to gather the irrefutable evidence she needed for the single, decisive strike. In the end, Julian's colossal, consuming arrogance was his self-made prison, and Elena's calculated, decade-spanning patience was the key that locked the door. If you enjoyed this detailed story of swift justice, calculated revenge, and profound redemption, please give this video a big thumbs up. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Share this with a friend who needs a powerful reminder that, in the long run, the truth always wins. Thanks for watching.
My flat sings wipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note a piece of me, forever here in harmony. My flat sings wipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note a piece of me, forever here in harmony. Music lives inside my heart. Music lives inside my heart.